Hey there, everyone. I'm Raymond Lee, the host of Clocking Out. This podcast, it was born from a deeply personal place. Like many of you listening, I've experienced those moments where you look at your career and you think to yourself, there has to be more than this. Those crossroads we all experience, they're hard. We tend to stay safe, feeling stuck, then taking that leap of faith. Clocking Out is dedicated to my mom, who showed me what courage really looks like when she took her own leap of faith to pursue career fulfillment. Her journey inspired me to find my own career path and now to create this space where we can explore other people's stories together. My hope here is that our guests might illuminate something in your own path, whether you're contemplating a major change or you're just simply looking for more meaning in your work. Either way, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Today, I'm happy to welcome Lynne Thompson to our Clocking Out community. Lynne is a former lawyer who spent over 20 years in the legal profession before she answered a call that echoed all the way back to her early childhood. And that calling was her love for poetry. A native Angeleno and daughter to Caribbean immigrants, Lynne grew up where books, education, and ambition mattered, and she never let her four brothers outpace her. Lynne pivoted from litigation to literature, ultimately becoming Los Angeles' fourth Poet Laureate, a nationally recognized advocate for the power of poetry. One quote that Lynne shared that really struck with me was how she described her law career. She realized that law was feeding her head, but not her heart. Lynne also shares a personal fun fact that I think everyone's going to enjoy. So here we go. Without further ado, please enjoy Lynne Thompson and her Clocking Out story. Hi, Lynne. Welcome to the podcast. It's nice to see you.
Hi, Raymond. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. I am just so delighted about our conversation here today. You and I connected, it's been a couple months ago, and I've had the opportunity to read some of your work, literally read some of your work. And I have to say, I kind of got a little bit of chills here because your journey um, is very relatable to me because my mom spent 20 years in the legal system
Okay.
before she made a career pivot. And when I was looking at your background and reading up on the work that you do today in the arts, it just reminded me of her journey. And so I'm really delighted to bring your story to our listeners and learn a little bit more about your story.
Well, I'm anxious to connect with them as well. So thanks again for having me.
Great. So, Lynn, I like to start from the beginning. Why don't you tell us where you're from and tell us what your parents did for a living?
Sure. I am a native Angeleno, the adopted daughter of Caribbean immigrants.
Mm.
My dad was a teacher and an electronics engineer at Lockheed Aircraft, one of the first African Americans to work there. I'm the last of five children, so by the time I came along, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, but she had previously worked in the movie industry as a wardrobe girl, as they called them then.
Mm.
So she was a fantastic seamstress, and as the only daughter, I got the benefit of that.
Mm. That's lovely. So tell me, what is a native Angeleno?
So, an increasing rarity as we have people coming to Los Angeles from all over the world, really.
Mm.
But I was born here. I am native to the soil here. And I tell people I understand how much of an Angeleno I am when I go elsewhere.
Mm.
So, for example, I had a friend who lived in St. Louis, and I was very anxious to see the Mississippi River. And so he took me and said, this is it, by the big uh, tower that they have. And I was a little disappointed, I have to say. And he said, Lynn, you live by an ocean. I said, well, that's true. That's really predominant in my mind. I don't know what I thought it would be, but at
Mm.
the point we were standing, I thought, not such a big deal.
That's nice. So what was it like growing up in Los Angeles as a young girl? What do you remember?
Well, of course, now it felt much smaller town. My mom didn't drive, so we went everywhere on the bus. My brothers, so I have four older brothers. The two older ones were out of the house by the time I came along, but the two younger brothers took me everywhere, which was lovely. But what really sticks out in my mind, particularly now as a writer, was that they would take me to the library. And early on, they'd take me to the library. I'd pick out my one book, I'd read it in the car and want to immediately go back to the library. And one of them said to the librarian, okay, we have to come up with something because this child's reading the books in the car and we can't be going back and forth. So ultimately, they were checking out books for me. But it made such a difference to have that access. And I think I would see them, of course, go off to school with these books. And I'm thinking there is something in those books I need to find out about. So that's what spawned in part my love of reading and ultimately writing.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. So, Lynn, as a young girl, what did you dream about being?
Oh, like so many young girls, I wanted to be a ballerina, but I didn't have the discipline for that. I did start writing at an early age. My dad was a closet poet. He didn't publish or really talk about it much, but he read me a lot of poetry and he was writing poetry. And so, but I didn't think of myself as a writer because that was something someone else did. So when I went to college, I majored in social psychology, thinking I would become a social worker, which I don't know why I thought that, but I wanted to do something to be of use, to give back, right? But that wasn't quite it either. And after I graduated from college and most of my friends were going to grad school, and I remember thinking, do I have to be a grown-up now? I'm not ready. I don't want to do that. But I went to work for a lawyer who's a friend of my family. And I thought, first of all, I thought it was intellectually interesting. And I thought I could do that. How hard could it be? I mean, you go to school, you take some classes. And so I ended up going to law school, which I will be eternally grateful for. It's still a profession, though much maligned and often rightfully so, that is fascinating to me intellectually. But the switch to poetry, and I know we're going to get to that, the law was feeding my head, but it wasn't feeding my heart. So that's how I ended up saying, I think I'm going to veer in a different direction.
So it sounds like as you were navigating your college career, you got your undergrad in the social psychology, but then you felt like you needed something that was more gonna test your mind, and law seemed to be the answer. And so you went to law school, got your law degree, and were you at the moment thinking yourself that I'm gonna have a lifelong career practicing law?
Absolutely.
What did that look
I
like?
absolutely thought that. First of all, I had spent a lot of money on law school, so I was going to see it through to the bitter end. Um, and I'd become quite ill in law school, and the doctor wanted me to drop out. And I said, no, if I drop out, I'll never go back. I've got to finish this. So I was anticipating that I would practice law all my life in some form or another. And I remember literally I practiced about not quite 15 years, literally waking up one day and saying, the thing that's wrong with your life is you're not writing poetry. And I had been reading it off and on and maybe an occasional poem, but not seriously. And once that thought really grabbed me, I didn't think that I was a litigator, so I was in court a lot. I didn't think that I could do that and find the time and the mental adjustment to then write poetry on the weekends or at night or whatever. So I looked for another job, got a call from a headhunter out of the blue. And I said, I don't think I can do that job. I've never done anything like that before. And I hung up the phone and I thought, isn't this what you were asking for something else. So sure enough, it was a job at UCLA heading up their labor and employment relations unit, which is my area of expertise, labor and employment. And went in, interviewed, got the job. That was great. And even though it was very demanding, it did afford me more space, and maybe just psychically I told myself that, to begin to seriously pursue life as a poet, much to my family's chagrin. My mother said, "Oh my God, what is wrong with you?" She said, "Is there any money in it?" I said, "Absolutely none." She said, "Oh my God." So, but I just knew somehow that this was really what I wanted to pursue.
Mm. That's so interesting because when you were describing early on, you were articulating that being a poet is something that other people do,
Yes.
and that you couldn't identify yourself as a poet at that early age. And so you ended up pursuing a degree and an identity as a litigator and as an attorney, where you ultimately, for some period of time, that was your identity,
Yes.
but it almost didn't feel
Yeah.
right. Like you almost sort of, throughout that whole process you went through, and it was challenging and you did all the things, but it's just so interesting that your identity took a different shape and sort of like it didn't connect with what you visualized it at an early age.
Yeah, and I think when you asked me about pressure, I think the pressure arose more when I graduated from college, and the family question, well, what are you going to do next? And
Mm,
I think that the family, so one of my brothers is a physician, retired now physician. One was an economist. My brother Sidney was the superintendent of the LA Unified School District. My oldest brother was retired as a captain in the Navy. So
mm,
this was an ambitious group, right? And so what I would call um, less degreed jobs, a secretary, a clerk in the drugstore, any that felt not up to the standards of my brother. So I
mm,
think I felt pressure to do something more. I
mm.
have a poem where I talk about having a regular job. That wasn't going to fit the family scenario. So I think that
Sure.
that's where I felt the pressure and said, let me go to law school. It's something I think I can do, that I have the intelligence to do, and it's interesting. Um, and so I did that, I think, as much to please the family as I did to please myself. I'll put it that way.
Mm,
Um, and it was great. It was great. I had good experiences, but um, there still was something else that even as a young girl, I wanted to be creative in some way.
mhm.
And
Sure.
I think many immigrant families are much more practical and less inclined to go after what they would consider ephemeral, less well paying kinds of jobs. Um,
Hmm.
yeah,
Right.
so I think, and that's why when I announced that I was going to be work to become a published poet, eh, not it's not fitting their story. But at that point, I said,
Mhm,
okay, I fit your story. Now I have to fit my story. And this was
mm.
really the right path for me.
Where my mind was going was how so many people go through that similar story where they almost have to validate
Yes,
something, whether it's siblings or parents or, kids they went to school with,
yes,
their teachers. And it's almost it's okay. I feel like, you get so much experience by choosing a career and a path that maybe ultimately isn't what you're going to do, but it's a
it's a
building
building block.
block.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think there's that's the experience. That's part of the
absolutely.
journey. And looking back, I think that sort of that experience that you had working as an attorney played its way forward
Exactly.
and has allowed you to be a better writer. So it's more than just satisfying the family, but it really is part of your learnings and your
Exactly.
journey and how you take that experience and apply it to the
Yeah.
next
And
thing.
and in some ways I'm glad I came to poetry in a serious way a little later because I had more maturity. I understood myself a little bit better, still learning that on a daily basis.
Mm,
But yeah, sometimes I think, oh, if I had started 15 years earlier, but you start when you start. And so
absolutely.
all of that has been grist for the mill.
Right. Well, I love the idea though that you recognize that this is what you're passionate
Yes.
about. And you always sort of had that passion as a North
Yes.
Star. And going through law school was just a little bit of it's not even a detour. It's a pathway to get to ultimately what you want to do. So tell me about your experience at UCLA and what did you like about the job and what didn't you like about the job?
Well, I do remember thinking, oh, this will be fabulous. I can spend my lunch hour in one of the museums on campus and the wonderful library and beautiful gardens, when often I was having lunch at my desk because something was blowing up somewhere. It was really wonderful to be in an academic environment and have access to various programs and so forth. But it was also a
Hmm.
demanding job. Being in employee and labor relations meant I was either trying to avoid a strike among workers, firing workers, laying off workers, listening to grievances. So it was demanding in that way, necessarily so. So there wasn't. I wouldn't say there were things I disliked about it. It is difficult, and this is true even as a lawyer, to hear people constantly complaining, and then you're trying to be up in the rest of your life. Um,
Hmm.
but again, it exposed me to a lot of things. I don't write about my working life as a rule in my writing, but I do know it influences a lot of my approach to writing. So all in all, I would say it was a really good experience. It was a really good
Mm.
experience. And it was one of the last jobs probably where you walk out the door and you know you have a retirement waiting for you, which has allowed me to be able to do some of the things I've done in my writing world in terms of travel and participating
Hmm.
in retreats and so forth. So that's been very
Mm.
helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so when you're working at UCLA as a labor and employee attorney, what, so are you representing the institution?
Yes. So usually, let's say in terms of negotiating labor agreements, I was representing the university, but I am proud of saying that I identified with the employees who were always trying to
Mm,
improve their working conditions or seeking additional pay or additional benefits. And so it was challenging to walk the line of saying, okay, I'm representing management. That's my role.
mm,
But I hear what you're
hmm,
saying. And let me see if I can
mm,
find that sweet spot. Management gives a little, the employees give a little, and it was challenging. I mean, I wasn't always getting everybody to say what I wanted them to say, but the question was, how
mm,
do you get to that point? So that's the sweet spot of being part of the legal profession that I like, is that you're trying to resolve an issue. And yes, you're representing
mm.
one side, but then you're trying to understand the other perspective so that you can find that sweet spot. I always say, if everyone's a little bit unhappy, I've probably done my job. So
Hmm. So how long did you do
I
that
worked there
for?
for 20 years. For 20 years now.
Yeah,
And then I said, you know what? I'm going full
yeah,
bore into my poetry world. And it's worked out amazingly well, I have to say. Um,
yeah. Well, I have to just something that popped in my head here, Lynn, is that how you were describing when you're representing management at UCLA on some type of contractual working
Yes.
condition or, something that's really important to the
Yeah.
institution and management. But at the same time, you have a group of employees who are represented by a specific
Yeah.
labor union, and they're looking for
Yes.
something. And I was reading a little bit of your poetry, and it's interesting how you really seem like you have a
Mm-hmm.
perspective of the employee's point
Mm-hmm.
of view and management's point of view. And for you to be able to identify with those
Mm-hmm.
two things, I feel like, that sort of skill set, I would imagine, gives you the creativity to write a piece that has sort of similar kinds of opposing, not sort of thoughts, but really the creativity of that. And I'll share an example a little bit later, but I just wanted to say that because it's so interesting. I mean, that's just one example, but I feel like there's probably over the 20 years, there were a number of experience you had that you were able to sort of tap into to bring out some visuals for the reader.
Yeah, I mean, it's
That's
interesting that you put it that way. I think that my training as a lawyer has caused me to try to find empathy to all arguments. And I'm thinking of a poem in my latest book, and someone asked me about it, and it's written in the voice, I say in quotations, of mosquitoes. I am deathly
mm,
allergic to mosquitoes, not just the bite, but then I get a welt around the bite. And I went to Tahiti right after I graduated from law school. I was on a game show, won this trip, and went to Tahiti. And the mosquitoes ate me alive. I mean, just everywhere there was flesh, they bit me on the palms of my hands, everywhere. And I always remember that, and I always plan for mosquitoes when I travel. But I wanted to write from the perspective of the mosquitoes because we as humans travel places and expect those places to cater to us, when in fact, we should be thinking, it can be argued, we should be thinking, no, we're going into some other place. Why should they cater to us? We take it as we find it. So I think that's very much from my training of thinking, okay, I don't like the mosquitoes. And the mosquitoes thinking, yeah, I don't like you very much either. you know. So yeah.
I love
I
that.
am I am trying to
Thank you for
balance
sharing
all
that.
the time.
Hmm. So I'm just out of curiosity, what game show led
Oh,
you
this
to
was so much fun.
Tahiti?
Um Joker's Wild, which is no longer on television.
I knew it was going to be the Joker's Wild. That was one of my
And it was
favorite game
the
shows
time
in
I
the
went to do
80s.
it, Jeopardy. So there was Jeopardy years ago. Then it went away for a long time. Then it came back with Alex Trebek. But it wasn't on at the time because that's what I would have gone for. But I went, tried out
Hmm.
for it. They called me and said, come on in. I didn't tell anyone because I thought if I embarrass myself, nobody ever needs to know. And I won $10,000 in cash and prizes. So that was very
I
exciting.
love it. That's great. So I'm curious, you mentioned you were 20 years at UCLA working as an attorney, negotiating contracts. At what point did you say that, like at what moment in your journey there did you sort of decide that I am going to leave the legal profession and go all in on
Yeah, I,
being a
I
poet?
wasn't really working as an attorney per se. They hired me because I was an attorney, but as the attorney's office like to tell me, you're not really in the attorney's office. But I was using my skill set in
Mm,
the job that I had. But I will
yep.
I will tell you, at 20 years, I went into the retirement office. I said, let me ask you something. How much longer would I have to work to see a substantial difference in my retirement package? And they said, oh, yeah, maybe another 5 years. And I said, yeah, that's not going to happen. If they had said 2 years, I might have stuck it out. But I just felt I wanted to retire while I was still healthy enough to travel, before my body fell into disarray, before, and I knew I would be saving a lot of money because I wasn't going to work and buying lunch and buying clothes and all of that. And just felt like, you know what? Whatever's left to me in this life, I want to spend it doing the thing I love the most. And that was poetry. And so I said, yeah, I put in my 20 years. I've got my good retirement. Could be better if I waited a little longer, but I could also be in some other situation that wouldn't be as positive. So I did leave a little early, and I've never regretted it.
I love that. So was there any struggle beyond you sort of figuring out, is this the right time? Because I feel like with, the generation baby boomers, let's say, are contemplating making making the exit, and they're early, and they have enough, whether it's in the corporate world,
Right.
the private world, the public world, but
Yeah.
they're struggling. And I just wonder, were there struggles, and what advice would you give for
Yeah.
someone who is really, they have something that's really burning and they want to pursue
Yeah.
whatever that passion is? In your
Yeah.
case, it was writing. Was there a struggle that you had to overcome?
I tell people who ask me that, and I get asked it fairly frequently, I said, have a plan. Don't just say I'm, walking out the door and now I don't know what. Whether it's volunteering, it doesn't have to be my path, but have a plan, because otherwise you run the risk that you're sitting at home popping bonbons and watching the TV all day. So have a plan for it. Something specific that a friend of mine that I went to college, who retired the year before me, said, within the first 30 days of your retirement, plan a trip. Doesn't have to be a big trip. It could be a trip. I live in Los Angeles. It could be a trip to San Francisco, but plan a trip that will distract you from the fact. For me and almost everybody I know, we've worked since we were teenagers. So the idea that you wake up one morning, you don't have to pop out of bed and get dressed and fight the traffic. And, in my case, where you're supervising people, now you don't have anybody to boss around. It's an adjustment. It is a mental adjustment. You feel like, shouldn't I be doing something? So this friend and I took a trip to Vancouver, which was fabulous. Not long trip, maybe it was 5 days, but I had something to look forward to immediately upon retiring. I think I did that in the first 2 weeks. But I knew that I was going to devote myself to poetry. But I had also been doing various kinds of community service. And I got called, I think within the first month, to serve on the board of my alma mater, the Board of Trustees. And within a couple of years of that, I was the chair of the board. And my board work just kind of took off, so that I'm now on the board of the Poetry Foundation, and was elected starting in January to be the president of the board of an organization, Cave Canem, which is a nonprofit literary organization that promotes African-American poets and poetry. So I somewhat intentionally, but not always intentionally, put myself in the room of being a good poetry citizen or a good literature citizen, which means maybe I'd write a review of someone's book, or suggest them for an award, or judge a poetry contest. So I was always looking for ways to be involved in the poetry world in particular, and literature more broadly, in a way that gave back what everybody so generously gave to me in supporting my path as a poet. And that has fed on itself, so that now I'm in those positions. I did serve as the Poet Laureate of Los Angeles, and people say, oh, I want to do that. I said, first of all, don't expect to do that because it was a heck of a surprise to me. But second of all, prepare yourself by being a good poetry citizen if you want to be the poet laureate of your city or town or state. So I was unintentionally intentional about, or intentionally unintentional, one way or the other, of putting myself in the position where when these opportunities arose, I was open to taking them.
Well, I love the idea. Thank you for sharing that advice because I love the idea of having a plan, first and foremost. So if you're contemplating either retiring or leaving the corporate world or your job earlier than what you initially planned, having a plan for the next 6 months to a year. And I also love the idea of taking a trip because people who I speak to who go away, whether it's out of the country or on some sabbatical, short term or long term, they always come back with an adjusted plan, right? Like they have the plan that sort of gives them the roadmap, but then going away allows them to sort of visualize and think about the plan. And then they come back with a renewed plan that they start to implement. And so I love that advice. And I'm curious, Lynne, because I know that you really took poetry as a new field.
Right.
It wasn't a hobby. And so I wonder when you left the legal profession and you started to pursue writing poetry, like tell me, how did that transformation happen? Because you essentially, we talked about, you had this dream of being a poet. You went to law school. You worked 20 years in the legal profession. And now that identity you just walked away from. And so here you are now looking to immerse yourself into the field that you always dreamt to be. And you didn't take that
No,
lightly.
I was very serious about it, but I didn't want to go back to school. I had just paid off my law school loans. I said, I'm not going down that road again. There's got to be another way. So I took every workshop. And fortunately, if you live in a city like LA, you get lots of people coming through town. They're giving workshops, readings, that sort of thing. Everything that I could attend, I attended. I joined a writing group. The leader of that was a local poet, but well-known nationally, internationally, David St. John, who was the one who said to me, well, I think it's time to have a book. And I said, is that how it works? Don't I have to have a plan? He said, oh, just look at the poems and put them together. And that resulted in my first book. So yeah, I bought every book I could afford or went to the library and got books, did both of those, subscribed to journals, just tried to immerse myself and show up everywhere that I could show up. The poetry community in the main is very generous. People said, oh, Lynne, come on in, read your poem. And I'd be embarrassed. And then finally I built up my courage to do that. So it was definitely a work in progress that I tried to form out of not having a degree in literature or an MFA. And I still am a little insecure about that, but I also have 4 books. So I guess I'm doing the right thing, working on a 5th. So
good for you.
There is a way to attack this. And one student said, well, won't it take longer? And I said, what, you got pants on fire? Yes, it will take longer. But ultimately, if you stick to it and you truly commit to it, you can get where you want to be, or at least go in that direction. There's still things I'd like to achieve, but yeah, you just say, oh, you talk to people, you ask questions. And I have a friend who's painfully shy, and it isn't as easy for her to do it. And I just drag her along with me everywhere and say, you've got to put yourself out there a little bit. So you find that medium that works for you, but you reach out, and people are very helpful. if you give them an opportunity, and if you are generous to them, they will be generous to you.
Mm. Amen. I love the word immerse. Like you didn't just immerse yourself into absorbing content, but you created a
Yeah.
community. Like that whole immersion where you were showing up to readings and volunteering, like you built yourself a community of people who were going to support you. And I love how you implemented that plan. And I also love the fact that you were willing to be courageous because when you're starting something new, especially when you don't have the academia and all of the experience, like you're jumping into something completely new. And I have to imagine that
It
it was
was terrifying,
terrifying.
and I guess what I want your listeners to know is that the flip side of that is there's something to be said to coming to this passion, whatever it is, cooking, sculpting, writing, whatever it is, a little later in life, because I had something of an attitude of what's the worst that could happen? They're not going to murder me, hopefully. I mean, if they say no, or you can't go here, or okay, I'll go somewhere else. You're not as, for me, I think if I had started younger, I would have been devastated. Oh, they don't like my poem. And now I'm kind of like, well, okay, they don't like my poem. Maybe somebody else will. And so I'm less
Mm,
personally disappointed. Of course, I'm disappointed when I get rejections, which is part of the game, but not as
hmm
much as I would have been at 25. I think now it's like,
mm,
okay, I'm still breathing. Every day I wake up and I have the ability to try it again. So that is really
mm.
always in the back of my thoughts. I have another chance to do it better, you know.
Yeah, I love that. So I am curious if you can share with us what is the one piece that you've written that is sort of your pride and joy that you can share with us?
All of the poems are my children. So as they say about children, you shouldn't pick a favorite. But I will say there's a
Hmm.
poem. So I think as a writer, you're looking for your voice. So early on, maybe you admire this poet or that
Hmm.
poet, and you're trying to sound like that poet, but that's not you necessarily. And I wrote a poem
Hmm.
called How I Learned Where We Come From, that is about my parents' Caribbean heritage and how that impacted us as a family, my brothers and myself. And it was that poem that I could hear my voice. I could hear the rhythms of my voice. I could see kind of where my interests were going. I write a lot about family history and history in general. And I think that's when I started to say, I think I may be able to do something with this poetry thing. I think I can get there. That was the poem that kind of turned me around. And I thought, okay, just keep working at it. This is a good start, but yeah, yeah, I would say that poem is.
Lynn, I absolutely love that. It makes so much sense. And, I was thinking about this whole identity transition where when you left the legal profession and you were transitioning into working as a poet and sort of finding yourself and you were immersing yourself and reading a lot of work and attending all these workshops and doing readings. And I think that was so beautiful how the poem where you really it sort of created your identity is
Yes.
connected to your
Yeah.
heritage. And it just makes sense of sort of
Yeah.
why that would be your first one. And so that's
Thank you. Thank you. It
touching.
is one of
I
my favorites,
appreciate
I
that.
gotta say.
So I was reading in your bio and online that you have a designation of the fourth
Correct.
Poet Laureate of Los Angeles. And so how does one become a poet laureate?
In Los Angeles, the Department of Cultural Affairs, part of the mayor's apparatus, puts out a call. You fill out an application that talks about what you've written, what kind of project you might have as the poet laureate. What happened in my case, we put our applications in. I knew other people that were interested in it. In about February of 2020, with the idea being that they were going to make an announcement in April. Well, then this pesky pandemic showed up and nobody did anything, right? So I forgot about it. The following January, and I remember the date because Biden was going to be inaugurated the next day. And I was on the phone talking to a poet friend, and an email came through, and I started saying, oh my God. And my friend is saying, what's happening? What's happening? And I said, I think I got an email that is like those emails you get from people that said, I'm in London and everything's been stolen. Please send me $10,000. And so I said, according to this, the mayor has just appointed me a poet laureate. I said, I'm going to send it to you because I don't believe it for a minute. So I called the city the next day and I said, oh, yeah. I said, you don't say, are you alive? Are you dead? Did you have COVID? You're still interested, And they said, well, we hope you're interested. So I was, my term ran for 2 years. It was a 2-year post during COVID, which was a real challenge.
I love that story. I appreciate that. So Lynne, I want to ask for your advice. So we know that there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, and there are people that are in a similar situation like you were in when you were working at UCLA. And I wonder, what advice do you give people who may be struggling with pursuing the passion that they ultimately want to pursue? And they could be mid-career, late career, but they know that they're not living out the work that they were called to do. Like in your case, working as a poet. What advice do you give people who want to make a change, but are just struggling with the courage to lean into that?
Yeah. I feel a little presumptuous in giving advice on this, but I guess I would say to look at yourself in the mirror and say, when you get to the end of your life, do you want to regret that you never tried? And to be clear-eyed in your ambition. Don't expect that you will be the whoever you admire, writer, actor, educator, philanthropist. Maybe you never attain that level, but if you did something that put a smile on your face and someone else's, you've done something special. And I think I would have hated to be whatever age, and I'm saying, this is it, I'm checking out in 5 minutes, and I never tried it. I never tried it. I should have tried. I should have tried. I think I don't have children of my own, but I have a lot of nieces and nephews. And I tell them, you're not going to get out of this life without regrets. But to the extent you can minimize them, go for that. You're going to have some regrets. That's why we call it life. But especially something that you really want to do reasonably. I probably would never be able to scale any large mountain because I'm not in shape to do that. But some reasonable thing that maybe has always been in the back of your mind, at least try it. Maybe you won't get the success you thought you would, but you will never be able to say, man, I should have done that. I should have just gone for it. I remember, this is not really on the professional thing, but I am not a swimmer. And I was in the Virgin Islands, and people were scuba diving. And I said, well, I'm not sure. And the gentleman who was on the boat, he said, I'm going to take you down on this scuba dive. I will be with you. I had all the equipment. I said, put me in that inner tube so I don't drown. I am so glad I did it. It was unbelievable. so beautiful to see the reefs and the fish and the colors. And I'm so glad I did that, even though I was very skeptical and thought, I'm going to die now. It's going to be horrible. And so much so that when we came back up, I said, can we do it again? He said, first I couldn't get you to go. Now I can't get you to get out of the water.
I love it.
So you don't want to look back and say, man, I wanted to be a cook. Maybe I'm not going to be a Michelin star cook, but if I can make some really good meals for my friends, how satisfying is that?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, shoot for the stars, and if you get the moon, that's not so bad.
That's not so bad. That's not so bad. What is worse is thinking, boy, I wish I had taken the trip to wherever, or just go for it.
Yeah.
Go for it. Be reasonable, be mindful, but go for it. Go for it.
I love that. Lynne, thank you so much for this conversation.
I've enjoyed it so much, Raymond. It's really delightful. You've made me think about things I don't always think about. So thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really appreciate everything that you shared, just from the early days to the extreme pivot, but also ultimately coming back to what your passion was. So it was really nice to hear sort of that journey. So Lynne, how can people find your work?
It's lynnethompson.us for my website. And if you Google my name, Lynne with an E, Lynnne, poet, interviews and some of my work will come up in that way. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I've left Twitter and am now on Blue Sky, so they can find me there as well.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you carving out some time here today. It was just a delight getting to know you. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All the best to your listeners.
Thanks, Lynne. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, everyone. It's Raymond again here. I want to take a moment and say a special thanks to our sponsor, Career Minds. They're a global provider of career transition and career development solutions. And if you like what you're hearing today, please click on the follow button and rate our show. Until next time, remember, if you're sitting there and you're stuck or just unsure of your career or future, and you really think it's time for a change, I would encourage yourself to ask these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? And am I doing the things that genuinely matter to me most? Am I creating value for myself and for others around me? Until next time.